I would like to welcome all of you who have joined the Karamba webinar on automotive cybersecurity compliance. In the next hour, we will discuss this topic, which we believe has become a hot topic in the industry for the last time. We have total of more than 200 registrants to this meeting, so I really very happy about the large audience that has come to see us today. Let me just go with you over. I will be your host for today. My name is Adar Eyal. I work in Karamba for the last couple of years, in charge of sales for Asia Pacific and Europe, working with the team. Together with me today, there will be two experts that will talk about different topics related to cybersecurity compliance for automotive. Asaf Harel is a co-founder and the chief scientist of the company. He will talk about things that are related to the compliance.
Adar, we are not seeing the slides.
Do you plan to share some slides, Adar?
Yes, sorry. I'm doing it immediately now. So do you see my slides now?
Yeah, great.
Okay, sorry for that. So hello again, I'm Adar Eyal. I will be your host today. Together with me, there are Asaf Harel, co-founder and chief scientist of the company. Asaf is in charge of compliance on cybersecurity services, on the regulatory and certification things related to that. And Tal Ben David, also a co-founder of Karamba. He's the VP R&D and engineering, and he will be exploring things like the other parts, the more technical issues. Let's talk about it.
Great to be here. Great to see so many people joining.
So with regard to the agenda today, I will give a short introduction about Karamba for those of you who is not familiar with who we are. Following that, we will discuss the journey to compliance. Asaf will discuss that. That's about the regulatory issues related to that. Going through threat analysis, which is the foundation for cybersecurity compliance, followed by system ECU hardening that will be presented by Tal. We'll have a short poll in between to talk about, to ask you some questions about industry trends. And we'll move forward to secure development life cycles and end up with verification and validation. After all of that, we will have questions and answers. So please feel free to write your questions anytime during the meeting today, also before the Q&A time, because we want to get ready with answers to the moment that we are going into that part of the meeting. So without further delay, let me just introduce you Karamba just in a few words. Karamba is an 8-year-old company. We are focusing on cybersecurity for embedded and connected systems. And the major focus of Karamba is on systems that are related to automotive industry. Altogether, our embedded software is residing in about 20 million devices worldwide. If you look on the kind of customers and markets that we are serving, as I mentioned to you before, then we are very, very active in the automotive industry. This is the major focus of the company. And specifically for India, you might see some names in this list that are Indian names, and also some other international companies you cannot understand from this list, but we are talking and working with the Indian part of these international companies. So this is just in a nutshell who we are, and then what do we do? Again, in a nutshell, the offering of Karamba lies around the cybersecurity life cycle. So we are starting from the level of threat analysis from the beginning, CSMS, helping companies to create a cybersecurity management system and provide some services like Tara and others, the training. for that. On the product side, as a result of Atara, we provide different products that are related to the hardening of platforms and systems. That is onboard security solutions by Karamba. And then for the part of secure development, we provide some tools like vulnerability scanning, SBOM extraction, and vulnerability management. On the verification and validation, we offer services such as penetration testing. And then for the post-production part, we offer event monitoring for that actually relates and connected directly to some protection embedded protection system that we may have installed in during the development side. And we also provide continual security vulnerability management tool, which helps to monitor the level of vulnerabilities along the life cycle of the vehicle. So this is just in a very short, fast manner introduction to Karamba. Moving forward, we have Tal to discuss with us. We have Asaf start to discuss with us the journey to compliance. Asaf,
Thank you very much, Adar. The journey to so what we are presenting here in this slide is the UN Regulation 155. UN Regulation 155 is the global regulation that was accepted a few years ago, and it is now being in effect in many countries worldwide. AIS 189 is the Indian derivative for our 155. It's very similar to what is written in the UN regulation, and this is how a country regulates or certify a vehicle to go on the road. Both regulations rely heavily on an organization having a cybersecurity management system, CSMS. And in that sense, ISO 21434 is a cybersecurity management system. In the next slide, we see the ISO 21434 in greater details, and so both UNR 155 and the Indian derivative 189 relies heavily on an organization having all you see the parts that comprise a full cybersecurity management system. Today, in this webinar, we are going to touch on focus area 2. You see here risk assessment and methods. I will cover that. And as a result of risk assessment and methods, the organization, so having a cybersecurity management system in place, the organization is accepted to reduce the risk. And in that aspect, we will talk, so Tal will cover security controls, different security controls that are embedded into ECUs and systems, reducing such risks. And later on, Tal will also touch on the development phase, where a secure development lifecycle is expected. Here again, part of this SDLC. And lastly, I will talk about, you see here 11 cybersecurity validation, and here 10.4.2 integration and verification. So verification and validation is an important phase in the development, in the secure development lifecycle, and we explain how to do that in the form of a pen testing project. So these will be the topics that we will discuss today. Yeah, so in the next slides, we are going to start with risk assessment, threat analysis, and risk assessment. Okay, so and by the way, I'm sure that Adar also mentioned it, the Q&A is open. Please, if you have questions regarding any topic that we are talking about, both all of us see the questions as they're being typed, and we will try to answer promptly. And later on, we will have a Q&A, opportunity to ask questions and live, and we will answer live. Okay, so when talking about threat analysis risk assessment, TARA, the process is broken into 4 steps. So when analyzing an ECU or a system, we break it into few assets being software components, network components, or data assets like keys or policies or configuration files, things like that. Assets are targets for attacks. So if I can do something to an asset in the attack, this is the damage, okay, that I create. So after having a full list of assets in the ECU or in the system, it can be even a full vehicle. So if I have a list of assets, now I can imagine, I can imagine the different damages and the threat scenarios that can create such damage. So if we mentioned, for instance, keys, a threat would be losing the keys, right? So information leakage on the keys is a damage because now somebody can maybe spoof or replace the keys or do some damage with the keys. So that's the threat list. For each damage that we wrote down, we now calculate the impact. So for instance, if a key was lost, maybe I can replace the firmware on the ECU, and the ECU can become malicious and do, if it's a safety critical ECU, I have now a safety critical attack scenario, okay? Threat scenario, and the impact would be severe, right? If it's safety critical. So now for every threat in the threat list, I'm calculating impact. The third step is, and the first step requires some cybersecurity knowledge, and this is to imagine how would we achieve such a threat scenario. So what would be the attack path, the cybersecurity, vulnerabilities and exploits that we need to perform in order to create such a threat scenario. For the attack path, and for every threat we have few suggested attack paths. Now for every attack path, we can calculate the feasibility of such an attack path. So, we need certain knowledge, we need a certain equipment, we need, few team members, etc., etc. So all these measure up to a certain, feasibility factor. And now, step number 4 is now combining together the feasibility with the impact. So for every damage scenario, what would be the highest impact that we can achieve with the damage, and what would be the lowest feasibility, so the feasibility that is the easiest, and this is the risk. So higher feasibility with higher impact, this is a critical attack path, AP2. AP1 and AP3 are also, as you can see, they are above the threshold. And in the next slide, what you see is our goal. Our goal when creating threat analysis is to reduce the risk here by putting cybersecurity controls in place, hardening the ECU, or protecting the network, or removing a certain interface, etc., etc., and by that reducing the feasibility to a place where the risk is below the threshold. An example in the next slide, we're going to see an example for a router where this is the list of mitigation. This is attack path 1, 2, and 3 from the risk matrix that we presented. And here, for instance, attack path 3 is a buffer overflow, but with data filtering and with authenticated source and with runtime integrity. So the software itself that runs verify its own integrity through secure boot and control for integrity and randomizations and things like that. Now it's much more difficult to exploit the buffer overflow, and therefore the feasibility is reduced from medium to very low, and from our perspective, from threat analysis perspective, it is below the threshold. It is a residual risk that we can live with. In the next few slides, Tal is going to go over, something more exhaustive regarding ECU hardening. So, Tal, please.
Thank you, Asaf. Thank you, Asaf. Actually, okay, there are a few questions, but I think we leave them to them. Interesting questions about Tara and so on that I see, Asaf, maybe you can look at them in the live and
yes, I do that.
And answer some. I think there are interesting questions over there. So, but thank you for that.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to talk now about system hardening, ECU hardening, and this is, as Asaf was describing the threat analysis and risk assessment process, which analyzes different risks and damage scenario. And these are, as Asaf was mentioning, once identifying those, the typical outcome of this process is an understanding of where your risks are and what are the different risks that are the ones that you should address and mitigate. And out of that, the typical outcome is to come up with different security controls that should actually be integrated and embedded as part of your system. So there are different security controls that are there to mitigate, to reduce risks, to mitigate potential damage scenarios, potential cybersecurity risk. And according to the outcome of the TARA, you will find that you will need to integrate those types of controls into your systems. Now, some of these controls are quite common and are something that is an outcome of almost every, applicable to every system and an outcome of every TARA. And some of them are more scenario specific or related to specific use cases and specific type of devices and ECUs that have more substantial attack surfaces, meaning potential interfaces where attackers can come from. So we'll see in the next, we'll see later that we're also talking about controls that are relevant for more connected ECUs. On this slide, we're seeing some of the really basic kind of controls that are an outcome of almost any TARA and are security controls that you will see as requirements in practically every system that you are developing, or in every vehicle are needed in every vehicle and in almost every ECU and every system. What are these like basic controls? So the first one, and for those of you who are developing devices and ECUs, there's a high probability that you are familiar with some of these, hopefully, and potentially you already implemented some of them in your systems. But it's quite valuable to understand and be aware of these types of security controls. The first one is secure boot, which is a mechanism that is intended to validate the integrity and authenticity of the firmware and software of the device once the device is booted. This is a security control that is in place to mitigate or reduce the risk that an attacker will tamper with the software image or the firmware that is stored and then flashed on the devices. And secure boot will apply mechanisms, signature verification mechanisms to make sure that the firmware that is being loaded every boot is the authentic one, the one that was intended, that was flashed in the manufacturing process, or that was updated through a secure software update mechanism. The second one is around UDS, and UDS stands for Universal Diagnostic Services. I'm sure you are all familiar with the UDS protocol. The UDS protocol is integrated practically into every ECU, and that's the typical and common mechanism to interact with ECUs to extract diagnostic information and also to apply changes and to configure and modify and manipulate the ECU. UDS supports a variety of services related to extracting diagnostics, to changing configuration, to reprogramming the device and applying a new software and more and more. Because of that, UDS is a protocol that can have a lot of power on manipulating and changing the content and the behavior of the devices. And therefore, from a security point of view, though at least the risky types of services that are available on UDS need to be secured. And securing them means that the party that uses them needs to be able to authenticate and authorize the operation, the risky operations over UDS. And there are a few common or standard mechanisms on how to achieve such authentication and authorization. The basic and most common one is called seed and key, where the device does a challenge response process with the party that is trying to activate the service, and that party needs to prove that it has the relevant secrets or authorization levels that are required in order to apply and to utilize such a service. And for the more advanced systems, we start to see the integration of stronger types of authentication and authorization mechanisms based on certificates and PKI mechanisms and so on and so forth. But these types of UDS, securing the risky operations on UDS is a very common security control that practically every system needs to integrate. And the last common security control relates to the fact that software updates are becoming quite a mandatory requirement, and the ability to update the software of the devices is something that is critical and needed to be able to apply fixes, to fix security issues, to respond to bugs and problems. And to support these software update mechanisms and over-the-air update functionalities, the devices need to support what we call secure flashing, meaning an ability to validate that the firmware that is being updated to the device is an authentic one that comes from a trusted manufacturer, that it's the latest software, that it's not an older version, and so on and so forth. And this is achieved through signature validation and version control and things along those lines. So these controls, you'll see that almost every threat analysis and risk assessment in the cybersecurity concept, that is the outcome of the TARA process, summarizing the security concept and the security measures targeted for the system to reduce the identified risk, you will find these controls as common controls that you will need to integrate. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, some of the devices have higher risk levels due to potentially risky type of interfaces being open to having a communication interface either to the cloud or to charging stations or with other ECUs that are more risky in the vehicle, and then when there are safety considerations involved. And in those scenarios, you will find that the security concept is requesting additional types of security controls to harden the system on higher levels and additional levels. The controls described here are secure onboard communication, or SecOC. SecOC is an AUTOSAR standard authentication protocol for message authentication for the in-vehicle network. It is most commonly applied on CAN networks, but can be applicable also for other types of in-vehicle protocols. And the idea behind SecOC is to identify the sensitive and risky messages where that if they are sent maliciously or incorrectly or spoofed, as we call it, by an attacker, they can cause significant damage. Think of a message like a braking message or a message that can shut down the engine and things like that. If it's sent out of context in the wrong circumstances, it can be very severe. Therefore, adding an ability to authenticate and make sure that the message is sent by a trusted source is important, and SecOC is a protocol, a standard protocol, part of the AutoSAR standard to support this type of security level. And the last item is a family of solutions that fall under what we call software integrity. We talked about firmware integrity in the previous slide when we were talking about secure boot. Secure boot validates the integrity of the firmware that is being loaded when the system boots up. But software integrity goes beyond that to protect the integrity of the software and the data in runtime. And that adds protection and validation that the different files and applications on the system have not been tampered in runtime, that data, sensitive data on the system is authentic and has not been tampered maliciously, and that risks that come from vulnerabilities directly in memory are also harder or not possible to exploit. If you remember in Asaf's example on the Tara, one of the damage scenarios or one of the risks were related to things like buffer overflows, enabling bugs that may enable attackers to manipulate the software of the system and tamper with its behavior. Memory protection mechanisms are measures that are intended to reduce those types of bugs that may appear in your own software or in software components that are integrated from suppliers or from open source components. And these types of controls are also may be required by the Tara process in many cases in relation to, as I mentioned before, systems that are higher risk or have more substantial interfaces to the outside world or to other less controlled components on the system. And as we'll talk later on, we'll also talk about, so these are types of controls that are intended to mitigate and reduce the risk of issues, bugs, and oversights. We'll talk later about how the development lifecycle can be integrated with additional processes and tools to even reduce the potential and to try and identify these types of risks upfront. The security controls that we are discussing here are intended to create mechanisms that will reduce the risk of security risks and bugs and issues that have already been integrated into the systems, as we see that such security bugs may be identified only much later in the process. So these security controls are, as mentioned, the outcome of the Tara, and they are things that should be integrated into the ECUs to reduce those risks and bring them to a manageable level. If we move to the next slide, we'll see that to realize and enable these security controls, a typical mechanism that you will be integrating into your devices is a security stack. Which brings the basic capabilities and the basic building blocks that are enablers to achieve those types of validations. So we talked about secure boot, for example. Secure boot needs to do cryptographic signature validation of the firmware. So to be able to do that, it needs to have the security stack on the system that provides the different cryptographic building blocks, abilities to store secrets securely for sensitive data, for keys, for configuration, and so on. And in the newer and more modern and riskier ECUs, these types of building blocks and basic capabilities will also be integrated on a hardware security module, which enables to provide these capabilities on a hardware level secured component or secure element, which is also known as secure element. The hardware security module is a component that is protected also on hardware level, in many cases running on an independent core on the system, and will activate and expose these building blocks to the rest of the application so that the security controls and primitives that are used to realize the security features that are needed are activated in a secure way and in an environment that is tamper-proof against attackers. So all of these together to summarize the topics we just covered. The threat analysis process came out with a security concept. The security concept defined a set of controls that need to be integrated into the devices to reduce the security risks that were identified. And these typically need to be enabled and supported with a security stack that is also built on top of capabilities coming directly from the hardware. So Adar, with that, I think I can hand it back over to you.
So thank you very much, Tal. The next step in our webinar today will be a very short poll that we would like to ask you several questions. Actually, 4 questions in just 1 minute that will give some kind of a highlight to the market trend, market trends. I think that you should be seeing the poll already now, and you can start answering it while I'm talking. Meanwhile, it's a very short one, so I think most of you can really answer it very quickly. And if you have more time during it, please do help us in asking your questions, so we will be able to get ready to answer questions by the end of the complete webinar. Having said that, I'm just leaving you another half a minute to answer the different questions of the poll, and then we will just continue with the other slides of the webinar.
I have to say, Adar, it's great to see such intensive participation from the participant.
Yeah, I have to say that we are also happy. I see that there are many questions, and by the way, we will share the results of the poll with you, just to let you know, to share with you the market trends, things that we have learned from these questions. We will do it later on together with you, just at the end of the meeting today. Yeah, I think we can move on. I'm not closing the poll yet, so if any of you have not finished answering, so please take the time. By the numbers, I see that most of you have answered it already, so let's just wait a few more seconds and we'll move on. The next part, I'm going to give the mic back to Tal, and he will discuss secure development lifecycle, SDLC, together with you. So yeah, so let's just let's move on. I'm closing the poll now. Thank you very much for those who answered. And Tal, please take the lead now.
Thank you very much, Adar. So yes, in the next few slides, I want to talk about the secure development lifecycle. And I think I see that as a complementary part to what we were discussing so far. So we were discussing that as part of the standards and the compliance, the system goes through a threat analysis, and out of that threat analysis, we identify potential risks and integrate appropriate security controls to meet and mitigate those risks. But obviously, any security professional will tell you that any risk that can be mitigated or resolved before your system is released and sent out to production is better. Anything that you can identify and find upfront is better. And the secure development lifecycle is exactly the process or the outline that is intended to try and identify and reduce as many of the risks as we can upfront. So from a high-level perspective, the secure development lifecycle is actually a set of processes and tools that are that become part of the development environment and the organizational processes throughout the development process, intended to reduce those risks. And we'll talk about three pillars, three facets of the secure development lifecycle. The first one will be the secure development process itself. We'll talk about that and how to achieve secure development, how to create a process and to create awareness and knowledge of developing in a way that is secure secure by design and secure and takes security aspects into consideration. On top of that, we'll talk about vulnerability and risk detection and scanning as part of the process. And as today's systems need to continue to be maintained and updated and software updates and so on, even post-production, the secure development lifecycle has actually been extended to go and to cover also vulnerability management and risk remediation after devices have already been shipped and are in production. So with that, let's talk first about the secure development process. And the secure development process is something that needs to be really integrated with the engineering teams in a continuous manner. It starts with awareness. Now, many of the I think most of the engineers are not, when they are focused on specific aspects of development and software or hardware and so on, but the awareness to potential security risk is important. And this is achieved through training and providing information, training, and it's important to do this in a periodic manner, so that this is because it's not the day-to-day activity of most of the engineers. Creating a process where they periodically get exposed to these different aspects and topics and considerations is quite important. This needs to be followed with security reviews in relation to the designs, to the software, to the code reviews. Security considerations and aspects needs to become a natural part of those processes. Whenever a security issue is identified and resolved, it's very valuable to create a debrief that can be shared within the organization so others can learn from it. And all of this needs to be complemented with supporting tools. Some of this is, processes and people and training and talking and so on. But supporting tools are very helpful in these processes. Things like static code analysis that is used to reach compliance in other areas and in safety and so on. But it also can provide insights into security problems and issues. Binary analysis techniques and tools that can work on the binary level, including elements coming from the operating system, from open source, from other suppliers and so on. And additional techniques like fuzzing that will be discussed again later when we talk also about the verification and validation and about penetration testing. So all of these tools are part of the secure development process and are important to tools and processes to integrate with your engineering teams. So let's say we have these secure development tools and we are reducing the risk. Next slide, please, Adar. And we are reducing the risks of trying to reduce the risk upfront. In addition, we should also apply mechanisms to create and maintain the software bill of materials. And this, we can argue that this is something that we can do on our own code relatively easily, but most of the system include elements and components that are coming from suppliers, from the supply chain. Could be operating system, could be drivers, could be libraries and other components, and the software bill of materials needs to cover all of them. We want to be able to detect vulnerabilities, weaknesses, and misconfigurations, of course, in code we develop, but also because we are responsible, we also need to identify such issues on components coming from suppliers and elements we're taking from the open source, and so on and so forth. And to make this streamlined and automated. It cannot be something that is sporadically done manually. It should be integrated into your CI/CD processes, and most of the modern and state-of-the-art tools in this space provide the ability to integrate into CI/CD processes. And then after that, of course, there needs to be owners that manage the outcome of these processes and systems, look at the mitigations, identify which risks are still remaining and what should be done about them, and so on and so forth. All of this can be done even before production. But as I mentioned today, things and systems also need to be continuously managed, and vulnerabilities need to continually be managed even after production. We need to monitor vulnerabilities that are being published in the world. New vulnerabilities are found all the time. We need to monitor those, to match them to our software bill of materials, and identify if there are vulnerabilities that are related and relevant to our systems. And when such are identified, they need to be managed and handled. The context needs to be analyzed. Are they relevant to our system? What level of criticality do they have? What's the priority? How will we mitigate them? And to manage the planning and the execution of such mitigation. This is an internal process, but you'll also find that as part of the compliance process, both your customers, especially if you're a tier 1 supplier or a tier 2, your customers will require evidence to these processes, and auditors will also require these when you want to certify your system and your processes. So you'll also be required to show reports and to show the evidence that you're doing these processes and managing, and you're staying on top of these vulnerabilities. So in all of these together, if we look at the soft secure development lifecycle, it brings a combination of your own processes, awareness and education, and appropriate tools that are managed to ensure that your systems and your products are controlled from the security aspect, from the initial development phases all the way to the end of life of the product. With this, I think we can hand it back over to Asaf to talk about verification and validation and the different processes that are applied and techniques for that. Thank you, Asaf.
Thank you, Tal. So I've been very active in the Q&A. Tal, maybe you can review some of my answers and see if you have anything to add.
Sure.
And I think that at the end of this session, we will also answer some of these questions live. So please feel free to, add more questions. We appreciate it very much. The last part of this session is referring to the last stage of the secure development lifecycle, when we have already a product that we think is ready for, we think that it finished its integration and it's almost ready for production, and we want to test it, and now we want to test it from cybersecurity point of view. So we want to make sure that we didn't left any cybersecurity holes, and that according to the TARA, and we reduce the risk properly with the security controls. For that, companies are, approaching penetration testing companies or cybersecurity expert companies, and what we do when testing such a component, we create a pen testing project. As you can see in the slide, the penetration testing project usually starts with scoping, if it's a white box or a black box, if what do we need to test as part of the testing. And this is the information gathering, and then we build the project based on what is required. If it is hardware analysis, firmware analysis, RF, communication, vulnerability research, and in certain cases when we need to also to demonstrate attack scenarios, damages, as we talked about when we discussed the TARA, we are also creating exploits and demonstrate the vulnerabilities. In the next slide, you're going to see, this is an example of communication analysis. This is a CAN messages. this is specifically over UDS, and what you see here, you see the firmware upgrade process. So it's very common to test UDS. It's very common to test over UDS the secure access, as Tal mentioned. This is part of the hardening. You want to make sure the diagnostic is not doesn't provide a way in for the attackers. And in this case, we are testing the firmware upgrade process. In the next slide, we are talking about fuzzing. Fuzzing is a very, very important technique to test mainly interfaces, so communication channels and interfaces. We provide input. The software behaves as it should behave when receiving the input, and if it crashed, we found a bug. And if that bug can be exploited by cybersecurity buffer, okay, an input buffer, this is a cybersecurity vulnerability. We mutate, create random inputs again and again and again and again until we create such a, crash or hang scenarios. So this is fuzzing. When thinking what should be tested in a penetration testing project, on the left hand you see different interfaces like the ECU interfaces, wireless interfaces, the in-vehicle communication like CAN and LIN and Automotive Ethernet. And we talked a little bit about UDS already in previous slides. On the right hand is the list of security controls that needs to be reviewed. Of course, secure boot, firmware update, HSM and key management, secure onboard communication if it exists, UDS, again, UDS secure access, et cetera, security controls that are in place. In the next slide, we see different components that recommended to be tested. Generally speaking, everything that was that we created at Tara, that we think there is a risk, cybersecurity risk associated with this component, with this subsystem. Of course, if it is a full vehicle, it requires penetration testing. So it requires verification and validation, which translates into penetration testing. And this is, maybe not a full list, but quite an exhaustive list of components. If you see your component there, it is, it is required. I think maybe this is the last slide, or we have another slide.
No, actually,
yeah, summary. So
yeah.
so that was penetration testing, and Adar, you can summarize everything, and we can conclude after that.
So yeah, so thank you, Asaf and Tal, for this very comprehensive, whatever can be done in less than 1 hour about what is required for going through the compliance process. So I'm going to just in a very, well, before we start to talk about it, let me just share with you the results from the poll that we had before. Feel free to browse it and also to roll it down because there are like 4 questions that you need to roll down in order to see. And while doing that, I'm going to go through the things that we have covered today. Yeah, so just maybe to talk about the poll results for a moment. The first question was related to who are our attendees today, who showed this webinar, and we found that the biggest number were tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers with like 50%, and the rest are either OEM or others, which we don't know exactly what that refers to, but mostly OEM and probably engineering companies and other type of companies. So this is the first question. We asked about when do you see your start of production going to happen? And the majority is, like, again, about 50% is looking for a start of production in the next coming year, 2025. In the next question, and the rest is mostly on 2026, and some other that did not answer that. Now, for what is the topics that were mostly interesting, then we saw that penetration testing was very interesting. This gained the most of interest on most attendees here. The second after it is secure development, and then ECU hardening and cybersecurity management system. And the last question is, we ask you, are you fluent? How expert you are in cybersecurity? And most of you guys admitted to be just in the beginning of this journey. So thank you very much for joining us in this poll. I'm going to stop sharing it now and move to the next part, which is summarizing what we had today, and then reading some questions and giving you some answers also on this webinar. So we have just talked about the growing need for cybersecurity, which we also identify in India. By the way, didn't mention that before, but as I said, India is a very major market for us. We have several people on the ground in India. I will be visiting India during next week. I'm coming like every month to visit the major areas of interest related to cybersecurity and automotive in India. So this is just to give you guys the notion that you are in our minds all the time, and we really think about India as a major market for our solutions and support. Now, we mentioned that Tara is the foundation of cybersecurity. Going through the Tara process gives you the answers where you should look into, what you should do. It creates the cybersecurity concept from which you derive whatever you do next. Another thing is that to do next means many things, but mainly hardening of the software platform, ECUs on even the complete vehicle. This is a result of the threat analysis that has been done on the first phase. We highlighted the need for a secure development lifecycle throughout the company, throughout the development cycle. And we also talked about verification and validations. Going through that, I hope that you enjoyed it, and let's go there are many questions that we have here. I would like to start with highlighting some of the questions that you guys have asked. Just let me find the right just give me a second on that. Yeah, so let's start with a few questions that were that are still open. The first question I would like to ask here, to mention to you, is what are the various penetration testing methods? Do we must to have source code to be shared? This is a question for Asaf.
Yeah, so first of all, the answer is no. Source code doesn't have to be shared. There is sometimes we refer to it as white box pen testing versus black box, and there are shades of gray between the most open to the most closed penetration testing project. We prefer having as much information as we can. It usually reduces the time of the project, and the vulnerabilities that we can find during such a pen testing project are more significant, but source code is not required. We will reverse the binaries and read your code as if we are attackers that we're able to obtain the binaries and reverse them. The type of analysis that was the original question. The type of analysis that we are doing are usually there are two. One of them is reviewing the communication channels by fuzzing and by just working with the protocols that you've implemented, and we will try to find to poke holes in the different interfaces and the different communication channels and protocols. And the other side is reversing or reviewing the code. When reviewing the code, we will read security controls, we will validate them, and we will try generally purpose to find cybersecurity bugs, cybersecurity mistakes, vulnerabilities, etc. So these are the two different aspects. Communication control will usually do analysis and fuzzing, so some random input generation. Code review is mainly reading the code, even if it's in binary form.
So next question that we had and not answered is how to venture into cybersecurity. I have software development experience.
Yeah, I think this is cybersecurity is an expertise. It's a matter of reading and doing hands-on. And I think it's a process. So maybe I think this is a more personal question. Yeah, somebody is answering learn. Yes, I agree. I agree to that. It's reading, seeing examples, reading about it, trying to look at what was integrated, what people are doing, reading the standards. It's a long process. There are different flavors within that. I think it's a more in this case. I think the question was a little bit more personal. How do I get into it? So maybe we
Let's
can
move
switch
to
to
the next
another.
question, and that is a question to Asaf. When is the best time in project lifecycle to perform Tara?
Yeah. So I answered it in text, so you can see my answer there. Let me repeat it live. The best would be when you have already a design in place, which is relatively at the beginning of the project. You didn't implement yet the functionality of the system or component or ECU, whatever it is that you are analyzing. But the result of the Tara would be adding to that design cybersecurity controls that needs to be designed as well. So therefore, the right time to integrate properly security controls into your architecture would be when you have already a design. I understand the question because in reality, the design changes over the life of the, even if it's just a year and a half or a couple of years, until the component is ready, the design tend to change a little bit due to customer requests, due to implementation constraints and other issues. And therefore, the Tara need to be modified as well. And maybe even created more granular now that we have already implementation code and controls already in place, the Tara can become more granular as questions are getting asked, what should be the key size, how should we implement secure boot, what is the right. And we see that in projects where we create Tara for a customer, we see that after 6 to 12 months, we need to refresh that Tara because the customer is already much more in the details and we can be more in the details with them. So these are the two phases that we recommend. Early on, and then after 6 to 12 months, when the Tara can be refreshed, more accurate and more granular.
Next question, and we are getting closer to we are actually past the time of finishing the webinar. For those of you who can't stay a bit more, just to let you know that we will share the questions and answers to all of you who have registered to the meeting today. Another question, and we'll try to answer them in a short manner, that I think is an interesting one. Is it an issue to integrate security controls in a legacy ECU?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I believe Asaf also answered that live. The quick answer is no. It's possible to do. And legacy ECUs is something that you can also integrate, assuming you have the ability to issue new versions of the software, of course. So you need to be able to update the software, but then it is possible. You will have to Of course, it's a case by case on, again, doing a threat analysis to understand which security controls are needed, and then to integrate them. And there will be constraints. Your hardware will not change, so you'll have to adjust to the existing hardware. But there are possibilities and alternatives in implementing different security controls using hardware capabilities, and when they are not available, switching to other options in software. And it's definitely possible to integrate security controls also in legacy ECUs. The specifics are, of course, an outcome, a case by case, depending on what the TARA says that is needed and is important, and on what is possible on a software or hardware level. But definitely possible, and you may be mandated to do so, because even if you have a legacy ECU, the type approval for the R155 or AIS 189 might require you to reduce risks also in legacy ECUs, and you may need to take such measures.
So another question, thank you, Tal, for this. Another question, I think that will be the last question that we will answer here live. Other questions will be answered in writing and will be sent to you, as I said. So the last question I'm going to ask is, what is the role of, when someone of you guys have asked this question, what is the role of technologies like AI in cybersecurity? Who wants to answer that?
Yeah, so it's a very wide question. I can give Asaf has been investigating and researching that to some extent. I let him answer more, but AI is a new things in many domains. It's also touching different aspects of cybersecurity, and its role will probably grow over time. I think right now it's still mostly a research area, and definitely in the low level and low ECUs. But as AI will be integrated as part of devices such as ADAS and so on, then cybersecurity measures will also need to make sure that those AI techniques are not being abused or tampered. But a lot of it is still in research. Asaf, I know you've been researching that yourself, so maybe you can add some more.
Yeah, AI. So first of all, AI is also helping us, right? So machine learning and anomaly detection and things like that are active in the way incidents are being created. We're looking for, through AI, we're creating a certain threshold, and everything that is above that threshold is considered, at least something that needs to be reviewed. That's on the anomaly detection side. That's on which is artificial intelligence. But AI also poses a great challenge for cybersecurity defenders like Karamba, because attacks coming from an AI brain can be very sophisticated and can exploit things that are now done manually automatically. So AI-based attacks launched on systems are expected to be much more devastating for the defenders, for the system under attack, and therefore the security controls must be extended to that era of AI-driven attacks. I think the third part is attacks on AI modules. So we are integrating AI into our application. For instance, think about ADAS with the perception layer, the layer that integrates all the sensors, create an image, and that image is now being used by some navigation agent to decide what should be the car doing. That perception layer is an example of a neural network of an AI that can be under attack. And attacks on AI brains is something that the industry is working very hard on protecting. And these are the three areas where AI and cybersecurity collide. Very interesting research topics.
Thank you, Asaf.
Sure.
And thank you all for coming to see us today. I just like to remind you that we will be sharing the Q&A. We'll be sharing the slides of the webinar with all of you who participated. And if anyone have more questions would like to resume a meeting with Karamba, or even try to meet myself when visiting India next week, we'll be more than happy to try and make this happen as soon as possible. Just be in touch with us. You have our contact details. We will share contact details also with the summary of this webinar to those of you who don't have it handy. Thank you again, and thank you for joining this webinar, and hope that it helped you to gain a little bit, just slightly little bit more knowledge than we had before. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.